Welcome, fiber friend. I'm Jess and this is Adventures in Knitting. I knit the perfect hat using farm yarn and I'm going to tell you how I did it. Obviously, a perfect hat for me might not be a perfect hat for you. That's not the point of this video. I'm not trying to get you to knit a pattern that I knit because in fact I didn't use a pattern to knit this hat. The point of this video is to give you confidence to modify a pattern to suit your needs, your preferences, your lifestyle. Maybe you like the shoulder construction of a sweater or the yoke of a sweater, but you don't want it to be so baggy. Modify it. Make the pattern so that it suits you and your needs. Now, as I said, I didn't use a pattern for this hat. I freestyled it. And I'm hoping when you hear what I've done with this hat and the pieces of my knitting knowledge that I put together in order to make this hat, it might give you the confidence to strike out on your own and start freestyling. I know it can be scary. It's like Emmett in the Lego movie, Chris Pratt's character, when he first learned that you could do Lego without instructions. I very much had an Emmett moment while I was making this hat. When I finished it and I put it on, and it actually was perfect, when all of the pieces that I had thought deeply about and put them all together actually created a final product that was exactly what I wanted, I was speechless. I put on the hat and I just sat there for a moment, realizing that my knitting knowledge worked, that everything I've been doing over the past year and a half came together in this hat, and I was able to make something that really, truly worked for me. So the point of this video is to help give you that confidence. And as I always say on this channel, there are no knitting rules. So today I'm going to show you modifying a pattern, creating something that suits you is okay. There are no rules. This is your knitting. So obviously I have some requirements for a hat. Mass manufactured hats have never worked for me. And I've mentioned it several times on this channel that my body proportions don't lend themselves very well to mass manufactured products. I have a massive head. There's no way of saying that well. I can't ever find hats. My husband often jokes about my massive head, and it's fine. It's not meant in a cruel way. I'm very well aware of how big my head is because I can't find like sun hats. It's too big. The sun hat won't fit. And we are out in the elements a lot when we're venturing. I've never been able to find hats. I'm often wearing a hood to cover up my head because I don't have a hat. And so when I started knitting, one of the main catalysts for this knitting journey was I wanted a hat to wear out in the elements. And we see all kinds of weather on our adventures, so this hat had to live up to it. On our most recent trip in May, we went to the Midwest. In late May, they had a cold snap. When we left home, the weather was going to be perfect for 2 weeks. Nice early summer warmth weather. That changed the first day we were on the road when a front shifted south and they went into a deep freeze. We didn't pack for it. I actually said to my husband, quick, find a yarn store. It's a yarn emergency. I will knit us winter wear. Get me to some yarn. Because it was so cold. And we were traveling through the Great Lakes. It was that bitter cold wind that's coming off the lakes with a lot of rain, and we weren't ready for it. So one of my goals until our next adventure is I'm just going to be knitting a bunch of hats, towels, scarves, mittens to get us through that weather. So this hat had to live up to all of those adventures that we go on and all of the elements that we see. The other thing about the hat is I am prone to migraines. So one of the things that I think causes me to struggle with mass manufactured hats is not only does it have to be big, it can't be tight. When I have something tight on my head, it can trigger a migraine. And if you suffer from migraines, you know that's game over. It is game over. It is better for me to try to stop triggering a migraine than to have to deal with one once it sets in. And I can't have a lot of pressure on my forehead. I can't have anything interrupting my vision because that will also give me a headache and that will trigger a migraine. So I need the brim to not be folded over, not a folded over brim. That puts too much pressure on that part of my head. And I can't have the brim obscuring my vision. And this becomes a problem because I wear my hats set further back on my head. I don't like them low down. So I like them further back on my head, sort of slouchy back here, not straight down pulled over my head. So one of the things that I was considering when I started to think about how I wanted to construct this hat were all of these little pieces that I needed to put together in the perfect hat. And honestly, I wasn't finding a pattern that really spoke to me and said, this is the hat. This is the hat for you. Over the past year and a half, I have knit many hats. I've had requests from other people for me to make hats, and I've made those hats. And I've found things that I really enjoy and some things that absolutely did not work. So I'm going to use one of the hats that I made as an example of what works and what doesn't work. So this is a gushy garter hat. The pattern is by Park Williams, and I have knit this up in Spin Cycle Plumps Rosy Maple. I'll hold it closer to the camera so you can see it. I love this pattern. I love this faux seam that's achieved with a slip stitch. You will notice a few things right away. You'll see this folded brim. The other thing is I knit this hat exactly to the pattern and it is too big. Not sure how it got to be so big, but it got to be too big. I think I know what the culprit is. At the time, I didn't really have the right needle. So I was trying to make looser stitches to be able to join in the round because I didn't have the right length of cord. So that's how it ended up to be, too big. The other thing about this hat is the pom-pom. This is the first pom-pom I have ever made. I am really impressed with it. I was really happy to make a pom-pom and I enjoyed making it and I love how it looks. I hate it in functionality. Really hate it in functionality. So when I'm wearing this hat, the problem is that I wear them further back. It's too big. When I'm trying to bend over, move around, bend down to pick up the dog business in the middle of winter, the hat falls off my head. So this doesn't really work. Now maybe if I had made the hat tighter, the pom-pom wouldn't be an issue, but it is because it is way too big. I'm still wearing this hat. I want to be very clear about that. I love the pattern. I love the finished object. I love how it turned out. It is so warm. Shout out to Spin Cycle. They make some good wool. This is a very warm hat. But it taught me a lot of things about what I wanted in my perfect hat. So what do I want in my perfect hat? Let's talk about it. The first thing that I wanted was a stretchy brim. This came up very recently. As I've mentioned on this channel, I've been teaching myself to knit socks. I've been using Denise DeSantis's book, No Fear Sock Knitting, to learn how to knit socks, and I've been watching her videos. She recommends the German twisted cast on, which is a very stretchy cast on, and as soon as I saw that, I said, yes, I want to use that cast on for my hat. I also needed to make it smaller because this hat is way too big. So measuring became key, and I want to talk about measuring. Before starting my first hats, I watched a lot of videos on measuring your head for a hat, and I saw a lot of people measuring their head like this. So that's what I did, and I knit my first hat, and it was too big. And I thought, okay, what am I doing wrong besides not having the right needle? I wear my hats like this. Would you believe there is a 1/2 inch difference between this and this? So the circumference that I was measuring was not accurate. So I knew when I wanted to do my next hat, I was going to take the measurement from how I actually wear the hat. That was really important. And so once I had that number, I knew that was the number of stitches I needed to cast on to get that measurement. The other thing, obviously, no pom-pom. I also needed to make it shallower because this hat I knit to the pattern. Again, I knit to the pattern, not to my body, my needs, my style. I just knit to the pattern. It's too deep. And it definitely is made to be worn straight down on your head, but because I wear mine off my head, it's much too deep. So I needed something that was shallower. I also love 1x1 ribbing. This is something I started doing on the socks. I love how it knitted up, and I thought I really want a brim with that 1x1 ribbing, and I want the main body of the hat to be something different, and that would be determined by the yarn I was using. So let's talk about that yarn. You might recognize this yarn. This is from my main fiber frolic video. This is 100% wool. I wish I knew what kind of wool. The tag that came on it didn't say. I did look up the farm it came from, and they don't specify the breeds they have in their flocks, but it does say 100% wool. It is a 2-ply hand spun naturally dyed wool. This is the one that you can feel the lanolin on. So wool contains lanolin, sometimes called sheep grease. This has a lot of lanolin still on it. You can really feel it. And when I picked up the skein at Main Fiber Frolic, I knew I needed to get it. I wanted to test the weatherproofing abilities of lanolin. So I knew when I picked this up, hat. That's what popped into my head. I want a hat for our adventures. The tag said this yarn was a worsted weight, but when I picked it up, I knew right away it wasn't worsted. So I had some Spin Cycle Plump, which is their bulky yarn, in my stash, and I compared the two, and they felt very, very similar. So I broke out my wraps per inch tool from Katrinkles and measured it. If you don't have a wraps per inch tool, I highly recommend it. I'll put a link down below. When I measured this yarn, it fell solidly in the bulky range. So then I knew what weight of yarn I was dealing with. When I determined I was going to use this, that it was bulky, that it was covered in lanolin, I knew it was time to do a swatch. When I do a swatch, I am not just looking for gauge. I want to see what kind of stitch definition my yarn will make up, and I also want to see what sort of fabric it creates. So I actually made several swatches with this yarn, testing various needles and various styles of stitches. I did some ribbing with it. I did some stockinette. I wanted to see what it looked like when I knit it up. I did not knit any swatches in the round. When you are knitting something in the round, like a hat like this, and you're knitting it on circular needles, it is advised that you make your swatch in the round because your tension can change if you're knitting flat versus knitting in the round. Because I had so many questions about this yarn, I just wanted to knit a bunch flat to get those questions answered. It wasn't so much about knitting in the round and getting gauge, because remember, I didn't have a pattern, so gauge didn't matter. I wanted to see more about the yarn and what the yarn was going to do. I think there is a common misconception that when a pattern calls for a certain weight of yarn, that you can substitute any kind of yarn in that weight and get the same results in the pattern. And that's just not true, because yarns are different. Yarns are so different depending on what you're picking up, that you may not get the same effect that the designer intended for that pattern. So when I'm swatching, I'm looking to see how the yarn comes together in addition to gauge if I'm doing something fitted. So when I swatched this, the first time I swatched it with a size US 11 needle, which is an 8mm needle. And you will see here that the fabric that it knit up was not tight enough for what I wanted for this hat. Remember, I'm looking for a hat that can withstand the elements. This fabric is too loose. You can see the white coming through in the spots in the fabric. I'm not stretching this out. This is just how the fabric knit up. So I knew the US 11 was going to be too big. So what I was able to determine from this swatch is that I actually needed a US size 10 needle, which is 6 millimeters, for the brim of the hat, and a US 10.5, which is 6.5 millimeters, for the main part of the hat. So I wanted a tighter fabric with that 1x1 ribbing around the brim and a looser fabric for the main part of the hat. I did try several stitch arrangements in the main part of the hat, and I ended up going with something surprising to me. But what happened was when I knit up that 1x1 in the brim, I kind of fell in love with it. So I had a different plan for the main body of the hat, and I ended up switching to just a 2x2 rib, and it definitely worked. So when it came time to cast on, the first thing I had to do was teach myself how to do the German twisted cast on. Denise DeSantis has a great tutorial. I'll link it down below. And the thing I want to mention about tutorials here on YouTube, you can often find multiple videos explaining the same technique. I really encourage you to find one that you love. Everybody learns a different way, so please don't get frustrated if the first video that you watch makes no sense to you. Find another video and watch that. That might be the one that clicks. Maybe it's a different camera angle, maybe the person explains it differently. Find what works for you. Everybody learns differently. So once I learned how to do the German twisted cast on, I then cast on 120 stitches to get the circumference that I wanted for my hat. The key with the German twisted cast on is not to set the stitches too tight. The whole point of the cast on is the stretchiness, and if you do the cast on too tight, you'll lose the stretch, and I really wanted that stretch in the brim. So from there, I proceeded with the 1x1 ribbing around the brim, and I did that for 8 rows. That gave me enough of a brim that I was happy with it, and then I proceeded on to the main body of the hat. I switched from the US size 10 needle to a US size 10.5 needle for the main body, and I continued with a 2x2 ribbing until I got to the desired depth. When you decrease for a hat, the decrease part often takes up very little space. So I knew when measuring the hat, I tried it on as I was knitting it to make sure I got the right depth. I knew that the decreasing rows were not going to add a lot of depth. So I had to get the right depth from the main body, not so much from the decreasing part. In order to do the decreases, I did use the magic loop, and I decreased my rows down till I had about 12 stitches left, where I cut the yarn, had long enough to weave it back through the stitches remaining on the needle and close the hat. And what did that leave me with? That left me with the perfect hat. I mean, come on, Fiber Friend, look at this. Look at this. When I first put this on, I had that Emmett moment. I had that moment of silence of, it worked. It actually worked. All of my knitting knowledge for the past however many years I've been knitting went into this hat, and I have created something I absolutely love. I created something that works for me. It has all of my preferences in it. It is exactly what I want. I mean, look at this brim. It falls exactly where I want it to be. It's not obstructing my vision. It is so perfectly fit. It's not going to fall off my head when I bend down to pick up the dog business. It's perfect. So let's switch to the overhead camera so I can show you the details. So here is my beautiful farm yarn hat in all of its glory. The first thing I want to show you is the German twisted cast on. Look how neat those stitches are. And they are very stretchy. I am really pleased with how this turned out, and it is definitely a technique that I will keep in my knitting arsenal because I really like how much is happening with this cast on. The next thing I want to talk about is the stitch definition. It's incredible. I'm so glad I went with the ribbing. I think it really worked well with this yarn, and I think it has so much definition because of how much lanolin is in it. There is a lot of lanolin still on this yarn. I will insert footage here. I took some stitches off the needles just to show you how they stood up straight. They did not collapse. So I think not only is it the structure of the wool holding those stitches up, but also the lanolin and keeping them so stiff. That's incredible, and I'm excited to see how this will hold up in the elements. The other thing to note about the lanolin is when I got to the decreasing rows up here and I was doing magic loop, the stitches started sticking to each other. And this was something that I didn't realize was happening right away. I actually thought I had somehow managed to accidentally knit into another part of the fabric. That's how stuck they were, and I couldn't move my working yarn. And it took me a moment to realize that when the stitches were held like this, and you pull the needle out to knit, the stitches were connecting and melding together because of that lanolin. So that makes me hopeful that this finished fabric is holding so tightly, it will really protect against the elements. But in doing those decreasing rows, I really had to tug to get this out and break those stitches free because they really wanted to stick together. I also want to talk about the variation in the handspun. This is the first time I've worked with handspun yarn, and you can see these little bubbles of yarn. That's just where the handspun was different from how it was here. So the spin was a little looser. You can see especially there how loose it was. I love it. It adds so much character to the finished fabric, and it gives this hat a truly rustic look. Some of the patterns that I'm considering on Ravelry say they will work great for hand spun yarn, and this will help inform my decision of what yarn to use should I choose to do those patterns, because now I've seen the type of fabric that a hand spun yarn can knit up. And finally, I want to talk about the decreasing rows, show you those in more detail. And you can see here how small this area is in comparison to the rest of the hat. You're not adding a lot of depth here. So really concentrate on the main part of the hat. When you're measuring for depth, that's really where you're going to achieve your desired depth. This is only going to add a little bit more depth. I learned a lot from knitting this hat, and those are lessons that I'm going to take forward in my future knitting. And it's really a few things. First of all, measuring to fit my body, not knitting a pattern according to what the pattern says, but how I'm going to wear the fitted garment. What works for me? What are the best options for my body, my lifestyle, and what I want the finished object to do? The other thing that's really important is this is the first time I worked with a hand spun yarn, and as you saw from the overhead footage, there was a lot of variation in the weight of the yarn. There was variation in the spin. So you see that those stitches were sometimes not always as neat. They were different size. So I've come to understand the fabric that a hand spun yarn can knit up. I have several patterns, as I mentioned, in my Ravelry queue that call for a hand spun yarn or suggest that the hand spun yarn works well for them. So now I have an idea of what that fabric looks like. But also, this is my first time working with farm yarn. And I, again, gained a whole new idea and perspective about a different type of yarn. As I mentioned in previous videos, I have a lot more farm yarn that I will be working with, including Lopi, which I will be casting on to do another hat. So I'm going to be carrying all these lessons forward to keep making hats that fit me and my lifestyle, my body, and what I am hoping to get out of the hat. Now I'm going to pass it to you. Do you modify patterns? Do you freestyle? Did you have an Emmett moment somewhere in your knitting journey? Was it organic? Did you even know it was happening? Did you know you were going to do it? or did it just grow out of your natural knitting evolution? I do really want to know. So please go down to the comments and tell us. Tell us your own Emmett moment story. Maybe you haven't modified yet. Maybe you haven't gone without a pattern. That's great. Put it down in the comments below and tell us how you feel about it. Everybody's knitting journey is different, and what I'm hoping this video helps you to do is consider how you want your own journey to be. And if you found this episode useful, please consider subscribing. I have a doozy of an episode for next week. I made a mistake. I made a big mistake that luckily I caught in time to correct, but oddly enough, I caught the mistake on camera. So I'm going to be sharing that with you next week, including the existential crisis that came from making this mistake and how I had to get my knit together. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next adventure. I'm never taking off this hat.